These videos are based on real events, experiences, and accounts. However, all names, locations, and identifying details have been deliberately changed to protect the privacy and safety of those involved. Viewer discretion is advised.
I don't talk about this much, not because I forgot it, but because every time it crosses my mind, it leaves this heavy, uncomfortable feeling in my chest, like something unfinished, like something I never really understood. This happened when I was 13, during my first year at a boarding school just outside a small town called Briarwood. It wasn't some strict elite academy or anything like that. Just a quiet, slightly outdated place where parents sent their kids when they wanted them out of the house. I ended up sharing a room with a guy named Elias Mercer. At first, he didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. Quiet, sure, kept to himself, but a lot of kids there were like that, especially at the start. We didn't really talk much during the first couple of weeks, just coexisted. 2 beds on opposite sides, 2 desks by the window, and a cramped closet we barely used. Things started getting strange when he handed me a list. It was after dinner one evening. I had just come back to the room, and he was standing there waiting for me, holding a folded piece of paper. He didn't say anything at first, just held it out like it was something completely normal. I remember asking, "What's this?" He just said, "Things you shouldn't bring in here." That was it. No explanation, no hint of humor, just dead serious. I unfolded it, expecting maybe something reasonable, like no food or no loud stuff after lights out. But instead, it was nonsense. It said things like no feathers, no insects, no frogs. That alone was weird enough, but then I got to the part that really stuck with me. No salt. I actually looked up at him and asked if he was joking. He wasn't. There was no smile, no reaction, just that same blank expression, like he genuinely expected me to follow every word on that list. I didn't argue. I just nodded and put it away, mostly because I didn't feel like dealing with whatever kind of person he clearly was. Looking back, that was probably the moment things shifted, even if I didn't realize it yet. After that, I started noticing other things. Elias had this habit of whispering to himself, especially at night. At first, I thought it was just sleep talking or maybe him being restless, but it wasn't random. It sounded deliberate, like full conversations, just too quiet for me to fully make out. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear him, soft, steady murmuring, not frantic or panicked, calm, focused, like he wasn't alone. It freaked me out at first, but I tried to ignore it. You get used to things faster than you'd expect when you don't have a choice. Then there was the notebook. I didn't notice it right away. It was always hidden, tucked under his mattress, but I caught him checking it a few times, always making sure I wasn't looking. That kind of behavior does something to your curiosity. It builds up until you can't ignore it anymore. So one afternoon when he was out, I checked. I still remember how quiet the room felt as I lifted his mattress and pulled it out. It wasn't a big notebook, just a thin, worn thing with a plain cover. Most of it was empty, but a few pages near the middle had writing on them. Names. Just a long list of names. Some of them I recognized immediately, kids from our school, people I'd seen in class, in the cafeteria, around campus, and a lot of them were crossed out. Not scribbled, not messy. Each one was carefully lined through, like it had been done with purpose. My stomach dropped as I kept reading, and then I saw my own name. It was near the bottom of one of the pages, not crossed out, just sitting there. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it, but it felt like forever. There was no explanation, no notes, just names, some marked, some not. I put it back exactly how I found it, but something had already changed. From that point on, I couldn't look at Elias the same way. Every little thing he did started to feel off. The way he watched people, the way he barely blinked sometimes, the way he'd go completely still when he thought no one was paying attention. I started spending less time in the room. At first, it was subtle, hanging out longer after classes, staying in common areas, visiting friends' rooms, but eventually I was avoiding the dorm almost entirely unless I had no other choice. And even when I was there, I never felt comfortable. It was like the room itself had changed, like something in it was always watching, even when Elias wasn't around. Then came the night that I can't forget, no matter how much I try. I woke up suddenly, no idea what time it was. The room was completely dark, not even moonlight coming through the window. At first, I thought I'd woken up because of the whispering again, but it wasn't. That was something else. I felt it before I saw it. That kind of awareness you get when someone's too close to you. And then my eyes adjusted just enough. Elias was standing right next to my bed. Not across the room, not by his desk, right next to me. He was just there, looking at me, smiling. His hands were slightly raised, like he had been about to reach for me but stopped halfway, frozen in place. I don't remember deciding to scream, it just happened. I jolted up, heart racing, my voice breaking the silence of the room. But he didn't react the way a normal person would. He didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't even blink. He just kept smiling. That same empty, unnatural smile. I demanded to know what he was doing, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. And after a few seconds, he finally spoke. "You were talking," he said quietly, "in your sleep." That was it. Like, that explained everything. Like standing over someone in the dark in the middle of the night was normal. I didn't know what to say to that. My mind was still trying to catch up with what I was seeing. The way he said it, so calm, so certain, made it even worse somehow. After a moment, he just turned and walked back to his bed. No apology, no hesitation, just lay down like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. And the worst part is, that was only the beginning. After that night, something in me shifted for good. It wasn't just fear of Elias anymore, it was something deeper, something harder to explain. Being in that room started to feel wrong in a way that went beyond logic, like the space itself had changed, like it was holding on to something I couldn't see. I stopped sleeping properly. Even when I managed to close my eyes, it never felt like real rest. Every small sound would pull me back awake. Every shadow in the room felt like it was moving when I wasn't looking directly at it. Elias, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened. That might have been the worst part. He didn't bring it up, didn't avoid me, didn't act strange in any obvious way. If anything, he seemed more normal than before, like that night had never existed. But I knew what I saw. I knew the way he had been standing over me, smiling like that. I tried talking to him about it the next morning. I figured maybe things would feel different in daylight. Maybe I'd get some kind of real explanation. But when I mentioned it, he just looked at me with this confused expression and said, "What are you talking about?" Not defensive, not nervous, just blank, like I had imagined the whole thing. I pushed a little, tried to describe it, but he just shook his head slightly, almost like he felt bad for me. That made it worse, way worse. It planted this tiny seed of doubt in my mind, even though I knew what I had experienced was real. After that, I stopped bringing it up, and things kept getting worse. About a week later, I walked into the room one evening and froze. There was a snake on my bed. A small one, maybe a garden snake, but very much alive. It was coiled near my pillow, barely moving, just sitting there like it belonged. I shouted and backed away immediately, my eyes snapping toward Elias. He was sitting at his desk, watching me. Not surprised, not confused, just watching. When I demanded to know what it was doing there, he actually apologized, calmly, like it was nothing serious. He said it was just a prank. A prank. I asked him where he even got it, and that's when he said something that stuck with me. "What do you mean?" he said. "They're everywhere." There was something about the way he said it that made my stomach twist. Not joking, not sarcastic, just matter of fact. Then he reached over to a glass jar on his desk and opened it, and the snake moved. It didn't dart away like I expected. It didn't try to escape. It just slowly slithered across the bed and dropped down, moving straight toward the jar like it knew exactly where it was supposed to go. I stood there frozen, watching it slide inside. Elias closed the lid gently, like he'd done it before. I didn't say anything after that. I didn't report him. I didn't tell anyone. I wish I could say I had some smart reason for that, but the truth is I was just scared. I didn't know what he was capable of, and I didn't want to find out. The breaking point came a few nights later. At least, I think it was a few nights. Everything from that time feels blurred together now. I woke up in the middle of the night again, but this time I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis. I'd never experienced it before, but I knew what it was. At least, that's what I told myself in the moment. My body was completely locked. I could feel my chest rising and falling, but that was it. My eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling. And that's when I saw it. There was something up there. At first, it looked like a shadow, just a dark shape shifting slightly. But as I stared, it started to move in a way that didn't make sense. It wasn't attached to anything. It wasn't cast by anything. It was its own thing. A mass. It pulsed slowly, like it was breathing, expanding and contracting, barely noticeable at first, then more obvious the longer I looked. I tried to move, tried to call out. Nothing. It began to descend. Not quickly, not suddenly, slowly, like it was taking its time. As it got closer, parts of it seemed to stretch and form. One section thinned out, extending downward until it looked like something resembling an arm or a claw. I could see it clearly now. It wasn't solid, it wasn't fully shaped, but it was reaching for me. The tip of it brushed against the edge of my bed frame, and I heard it. A scraping sound. Real. Loud enough to cut through the silence. It dragged along the wood, slow and deliberate. Then it moved closer. Closer to me. I could feel something building in my chest, like pressure, like panic trying to force its way out of my body. And then, just as it reached for me, it jerked back, violently, like something had burned it. The entire mass recoiled, twisting in on itself, and then it started moving faster, erratic, uncontrolled. It slammed into the desk, knocking things over. Paper scattered, something crashed to the floor. It moved across the room like a storm trapped indoors. And then, without warning, it shot toward the window. There was a loud crack, glass shattered, and it was gone. The sound snapped something in me. My body unlocked all at once. I gasped, pulling in air like I'd been underwater. My eyes were still fixed on the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The window was broken, actually broken. Shards of glass were falling from the frame, hitting the floor in real time. This wasn't a dream. My entire body started shaking. I forced myself to move, turning my head slowly, scanning the room. It looked exactly like what I had just seen. The desk was a mess, papers everywhere, objects knocked over. And then I looked down on my bed. There were long, fresh scratches carved into the frame, right where that thing had touched it. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to Elias. He was asleep, completely still, snoring softly. I grabbed him and started shaking him hard. Nothing. No reaction. I kept shaking him, calling his name, my voice breaking. And the longer he didn't wake up, the worse it felt. Because if it wasn't him, then what was it? Eventually, I backed away, my hands trembling, my mind spiraling into places I didn't want it to go. A few minutes later, he finally woke up. He looked around the room, confused at first. Then he looked at me, and instead of asking what happened, he accused me, said I'd gone through his things, like that was the only explanation that mattered. We started yelling at each other. I was terrified, angry, desperate for him to just admit something, but he didn't. Instead, he started hissing, like an animal, low at first, then louder, and then he started shouting in a language I had never heard before. It didn't sound like anything I recognized, harsh, fast, completely unnatural. That's when I thought he was going to attack me. I don't remember everything after that clearly. I know someone knocked on the door. The RA came in, saw the state of the room, heard us yelling, and immediately separated us. I was moved to another room that night. I barely slept. When I woke up the next morning, the window in that room was open, wide open, even though I remembered closing it. That was enough for me. Later that day, I went back to my old room to grab the rest of my stuff. Elias was gone. Everything of his. No explanation, no warning. When I asked about him, they just told me he had been transferred and that it wasn't my concern anymore. I never saw him again, and I never got any answers. All I know is that something happened in that room. Something real. And I still don't know what scares me more. That it might have been him, or that it wasn't. This happened when I was a kid, back when my parents used to send me away every summer to stay with my grandparents. Their place was out in rural Virginia, sitting on a huge stretch of land that was mostly woods with a small cleared area around the house. It wasn't a farm in the traditional sense, but everyone still called it one because of how isolated it felt. I used to go there for 2 weeks every July. My cousin Mateo would go later in August, so we never really overlapped. At the time, I didn't think much of that arrangement, but looking back, I'm kind of glad we were never there together. The house itself was old, not the charming kind of old either. It had this quiet, heavy feeling to it, like it had been standing there for too long. There were 3 floors, but the top floor was basically just an attic that had been converted into a bedroom. That's where I stayed. The ceiling sloped down on both sides, and there was only one window positioned at the far end of the room. It overlooked the backyard and then miles of trees beyond that. During the day, it was actually kind of peaceful. At night, it was something else entirely. My grandparents had a strict routine: dinner at 6, TV for an hour, and then bed before 9. They expected me to follow the same schedule, but I never did. I'd wait until I heard their bedroom door close, then I'd stay up reading with a flashlight or playing my old handheld games under the covers. The first year, nothing happened. It was quiet, maybe a little boring, but nothing strange. The second summer is when things started to feel off. One night, I was lying in bed reading when I heard footsteps on the attic stairs. They were soft, not like the usual creaks the house made. These sounded deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. I remember freezing in place, listening carefully as the snaps got closer. Then the doorknob slowly turned. The door cracked open just a few inches. At the time, I assumed it was my grandmother checking on me. I panicked a little, thinking I'd get in trouble for being awake, so I quickly shut off my flashlight and pretended to be asleep. I waited for her to say something, but she didn't. There was no voice, no movement, nothing. And the weirdest part, I never heard the footsteps walk away. I never heard the door close either. I lay there for what felt like hours, too scared to open my eyes again. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, convincing myself that I had just missed her leaving. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to my grandfather over breakfast. He didn't seem concerned at all, just chuckled and said the house made noises at night. He even suggested that raccoons sometimes got in the walls. That explanation didn't sit right with me. I was certain I had seen the door move, but I didn't argue. I just nodded and dropped it. A few nights later, something else happened. I woke up suddenly, like something had pulled me out of sleep. At first, I didn't understand what was wrong. Then I realized my bed was shaking. Not violently, but enough that I could feel it. I looked toward the foot of the bed and saw someone standing there. Just a silhouette, completely still. My heart started pounding immediately. I couldn't tell who it was. The room was too dark to make out any details. For some reason, I didn't scream. I just shut my eyes and started counting in my head, hoping that if I ignored it, it would go away. When I reached 100 and opened my eyes again, the figure was gone. I told myself it had to be a dream. It didn't feel like one, but what else could it have been? That morning, I noticed my closet door was open. I was certain I had closed it before going to bed. That was the first time I felt something close to real fear in that house. Still, I didn't say anything to my grandparents. I didn't want them to think I was imagining things or being dramatic. And honestly, I wasn't even sure what I had experienced. The rest of that visit was filled with small things like that. Doors slightly open when I knew I had shut them, soft noises late at night that didn't match the usual sounds of the house, and once or twice that same feeling of being watched when I was lying in bed. Nothing ever happens during the day. It was always at night, always when I was alone in that attic room. By the time my parents came to pick me up, I was relieved to leave. I remember telling my mom about everything on the drive home. She listened, but she didn't take it seriously. She said old houses make strange noises and that my imagination was probably getting the better of me. She also pointed out that Mateo had never complained about anything during his visits. That made me doubt myself. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I had just been scared of being alone in a quiet place. The next summer, I went back, and almost immediately it started again. The footsteps, the door, that feeling that I wasn't alone up there. But this time, I didn't stay up late anymore. I went to bed early, hoping sleep would keep me from noticing anything strange. It didn't always work. There were nights where I'd wake up for no reason at all, my heart already racing before I even opened my eyes. And every time I'd lay there in the dark, too afraid to move, convinced that if I looked, I'd see someone standing at the foot of my bed again. Eventually, the visit stopped altogether. I got older, my parents stopped sending me there, and life moved on. For years, I pushed those memories aside, convincing myself they weren't important, that they weren't real. But then, a long time later, after both of my grandparents had passed away, I had a conversation that brought everything rushing back, and it made what I experienced back then feel a lot less like imagination and a lot more like something else entirely. I hadn't thought about those summers in years. Not seriously, anyway. They were just these strange, half-buried memories that only surfaced every now and then, usually late at night when my mind wandered to things I didn't fully understand. For the most part, I'd convinced myself that it had all been a mix of childhood imagination and the natural creepiness of an old house in the middle of nowhere. That explanation worked. It had to. Until the funeral. Both of my grandparents passed away within weeks of each other while I was in college. It was a rough time for the family, and the funeral brought together relatives I hadn't seen in years. People I barely remembered, conversations that felt forced, and that heavy atmosphere that always comes with gatherings like that. That's when I saw Mateo again. We hadn't really spoken much growing up. Even though we were close in age, the way our visits were scheduled meant we never shared those summers. Still, we knew each other well enough to fall into small talk. At first, the conversation was exactly what you'd expect. School, work, life, all the usual things people say when they don't really know what else to talk about. Then, naturally, the topic shifted to our grandparents, and from there, to the house. I don't know why I brought it up. Maybe it was the setting, or maybe some part of me had been waiting for the chance to say it out loud again. But I ended up telling him about my summers there, about the attic room, about the footsteps, the door, the figure at the end of my bed. I even laughed a little as I said it, trying to make it sound less serious than it had felt at the time, like it was just some creepy childhood story that didn't really mean anything. Mateo didn't laugh. He didn't react much at all, actually. He just looked at me with this flat expression that immediately made me feel uneasy. There was a pause after I finished, the kind that lasts just a little too long. Then he said something that I still think about more than I'd like to admit. "That's nothing," he said quietly. "It used to touch me." I remember staring at him, waiting for some kind of follow-up that would turn it into a joke. It never came. The way he said it, there was no humor in it, no exaggeration, just a simple statement like he was describing something completely normal. I asked him what he meant, and then he told me. He said that during his stays, he would see the same figure standing at the foot of his bed, just like I had, always at night, always silent at first. But for him, it didn't stop there. He said there were nights where he could feel the mattress shift, like someone had sat down beside him, slowly, deliberately. He told me that he would keep his eyes closed, pretending to be asleep because he was too scared to see it clearly. But even without looking, he knew it was there. He could feel it. There were times, he said, when something would touch his face, light at first, like fingertips tracing along his cheek, his jaw, even across his forehead. Other times it would grab his wrist, not violently, but firmly enough that he knew it wasn't his imagination. I asked him how he could be sure it wasn't our grandparents, that maybe they were checking on him like I had assumed at first. He shook his head. And the way he did it, it wasn't dramatic. It was certain. He said the hands didn't feel like theirs. He described them as rough, scratchy, wrong. That was the word he used. Wrong. I didn't know what to say after that. My mind kept trying to find a logical explanation, something that could make sense of both our experiences at the same time. But the more he talked, the harder that became. I asked him why he had never told anyone. He said he had, more than once. He told his mom and she didn't believe him. She thought he was having nightmares or trying to get attention. Eventually, she got frustrated enough that he stopped bringing it up altogether. So he dealt with it on his own. Every night, the same routine. Keep your eyes closed. Don't move. Wait for it to leave. Listening to him say that, it did something to me. Up until that moment, there had always been this small part of me that believed I had imagined everything, that I was a kid in a strange place letting my mind run wild. But hearing him describe the same thing, in more detail, worse detail, it took that explanation away, completely. We didn't talk about it much after that. There wasn't really anything else to say. The conversation just kind of died, and we both drifted off to talk to other relatives like we hadn't just shared something deeply unsettling. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not that day, not in the days after, and not even now. Because once you accept that it wasn't just in your head, you're left with a much worse question. What actually happened in that house? I've gone over it countless times since then, tried to break it down piece by piece. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. That would explain the figure, the inability to move, the fear. But it doesn't explain the door, or the footsteps, or the fact that two different people at different times experienced nearly the same thing. And it definitely doesn't explain the physical part of what Mateo described. Then there's the other possibility, the one I don't like to think about. That someone else was in that house, living there without my grandparents knowing, moving through it at night, watching us, touching him. But that doesn't make sense either. There were no signs of that during the day. No missing food, no strange noises when everyone was awake, nothing out of place that would suggest another person was there. And even if there had been, I don't know which explanation is worse. Something we can't explain, or something we can. All I know is that whatever it was, it didn't just exist in my imagination. It was there, in that attic room, at the foot of the bed, waiting. And the fact that Mateo and I both experienced it years apart without ever talking about it, that's the part that still keeps me up some nights. Because it means one thing. It wasn't random. And it probably wasn't harmless either. This happened when I was about 9 years old, back when my family lived in a narrow townhouse in a crowded neighborhood in New Jersey. The houses were built so close together that if you leaned out the window far enough, you could probably reach the one behind ours. My bedroom was on the 3rd floor, right at the back of the house. The window faced directly into the house behind us. Not the yard, not the street, but straight into another window. It couldn't have been more than 20 feet away. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It was just something I noticed out of boredom more than anything else. Sometimes I'd look across into that window just to see if anything was going on. Most of the time, it was empty. Then one day, it wasn't. I remember getting home from school, tossing my backpack onto the floor and walking over to the window like I always did. And that's when I saw her. There was a girl standing in the room across from mine. She looked about my age, maybe a year older at most. She had dark hair pulled back into a ponytail, and she was wearing this bright yellow sweater. That's the thing I remember the most about her. It stood out so much against everything else. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. Then she smiled and waved. I hesitated for a moment, mostly because I wasn't expecting it, but then I waved back. She disappeared from the window right after that. I figured that was it, just a random moment. But the next day, when I came home from school at the same time, she was there again. Same spot, same yellow sweater. She waved, and this time I waved back immediately. That turned into a routine faster than I expected. Every weekday, almost at the exact same time, she would appear in that window, always around 3:30, like she was waiting for me. And every time she was wearing that same yellow sweater. We never spoke, at least not at first. We started with simple things, waving, smiling, pointing at random objects in our rooms. It felt like one of those silent games kids come up with naturally. Eventually, it turned into more. She would hold up drawings and I'd try to guess what they were. I'd show her my homework and she'd give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, depending on how she thought I did. It sounds stupid now, but at the time it felt completely normal, like we had our own little world that existed just between those two windows. There was one thing I found a little strange though. She never opened her window. Not once. On warmer days, I would slide mine open and try talking to her, but she would just shake her head and smile, then point to her ear like she couldn't hear me through the glass. I assumed her parents were strict about keeping the windows closed or something. It didn't seem like a big deal. After a while, I asked my mom about the house behind ours. She told me an older couple lived there, the Harrisons. No kids. I told her about the girl. She didn't seem concerned, just said maybe they had a granddaughter visiting for a while. That explanation made sense, but it also made me a little sad. I figured she'd eventually leave. But she didn't. Weeks went by, and she was still there, every single day. Same time, same place, same yellow sweater. Looking back, that should have been the first real red flag. No one wears the exact same thing every single day for weeks, especially not a kid. But I didn't question it. I was just happy to have someone to interact with. Then one night, something changed. I woke up suddenly, not sure why. At first, I thought I had just had a bad dream or something. But then I heard it. A faint tapping sound. I sat up in bed, listening. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. That alone was enough to make me nervous. She had never been there at night before, not once. I slowly got out of bed and walked over. She was there, right at the window. But something was off. She wasn't smiling, not even a little. Her face looked tense, almost desperate. She raised her hand and pointed downward at something I couldn't see, then brought her hands together like she was begging. I didn't understand what she wanted. I just stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. She kept tapping. Faster now, more urgent. It scared me. I don't know why, but it did. Instead of opening the window or trying to figure it out, I backed away and climbed back into bed, pulling the blanket over my head like that would somehow make it stop. The tapping continued for a few more minutes. Then it stopped. The next day, she wasn't there. Not at 3:30. Not at all. I remember feeling this weird mix of guilt and confusion, like maybe I had done something wrong by ignoring her. She didn't show up the day after that either, or the next. By the third day, I started convincing myself that maybe she had gone home, that she really had just been visiting, like my mom said. But on the fourth night, the tapping came back. Louder this time, more frantic. I didn't want to go to the window. Every part of me was telling me not to, but I did anyway. Slowly, I walked over and looked out. She was there again, pressing both of her hands flat against the glass. Her mouth was moving like she was saying something, but I couldn't hear anything. Her breathing fogged up the window in short bursts, even though it wasn't cold outside. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop. She was repeating the same words over and over again. I couldn't hear them, but I could read her lips. Help me. Over and over. Help me. I froze. I didn't know what to do. And then she stepped back slightly, just enough for me to notice something I hadn't seen before. There was a dark stain on the front of her yellow sweater. It looked wet, uneven, like something had spilled or worse. That was the moment panic really hit me. I ran out of my room and into my parents' bedroom, barely getting the words out. My dad followed me back, turning on the light as soon as we stepped inside. But when he looked out the window, there was nothing there. The room across from mine was completely dark, empty, just like it had been before I ever saw her. And that was the last time I ever saw her at night. After that night, everything changed. The next afternoon, I went straight to my room after school like I always did. I didn't even take off my backpack. I just walked over to the window and looked out, half hoping, half dreading that she'd be there again. She wasn't. The window across from mine was empty. No movement, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring into that room, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. That's when I started to feel it. Not fear exactly, not yet. More like confusion mixed with something heavier, the kind of feeling you get when something stops making sense, but you don't know why. Later that day, I made a decision that, looking back, I probably shouldn't have. I went outside. Our backyard had a small fence that separated it from the narrow strip of land behind the neighboring houses. It wasn't hard to climb, especially for a kid. I had done it before when I was younger, just messing around. This time, I climbed over and made my way toward the house behind ours. I could see Mrs. Harrison out in her garden. She was watering plants, moving slowly like older people tend to do. I remember hesitating for a second, wondering if I'd get in trouble for being back there. But curiosity won. I walked up to the edge of the yard and waved at her. She noticed me almost immediately and smiled. At least she did at first. I asked her about the girl. Specifically, I asked if the girl in the upstairs room was her granddaughter. The change in her expression was instant. Her smile dropped like it had never been there to begin with. She set the watering can down slowly and took a few steps toward me. There was something about the way she looked at me that made me wish I hadn't asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked me a question. How long have you been seeing her? Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't kind either. It was serious. Too serious for something that should have been a simple question. I told her the truth. A few weeks, maybe a little longer. She asked me to describe her. I told her everything. The dark hair, the ponytail, the yellow sweater, how she was always in the window around the same time every day. I even mentioned how she never opened the window. Mrs. Harrison didn't say anything for a few seconds after that. She just stared at me. Then she told me to go back home. Not in a rude way, but firmly, like she didn't want me there anymore. I didn't argue. I climbed back over the fence and went inside, feeling like I had just done something wrong, even though I didn't understand why. That night, my parents moved my bed. They turned it so it no longer faced the window. Then they hung up thick curtains, the kind that blocked out all the light completely. When I asked why, they told me it would help me sleep better. I knew that wasn't the real reason. The next day, my mom told me I wasn't allowed to go near the window anymore. Not to look through it, not to open it, nothing. When I asked why, she just said I was getting too old for imaginary friends. That confused me more than anything else. I told her the girl wasn't imaginary, that I saw her every day for weeks. She didn't respond to that. She just repeated the rule, no window. That was the end of it. Or at least that's how they treated it. The girl never came back. Not during the day, not at night. It was like she had never been there at all. A year later, we moved to a different house, one with no windows facing other buildings. At the time, I didn't question that either. I just moved on. Or at least I tried to. It wasn't until years later, when I was in high school, that I finally got an explanation, or something close to one. It happened during a random conversation with my mom. I don't even remember how the topic came up, but somehow we ended up talking about that old house again. And I brought her up, the girl in the window. For a second, my mom didn't say anything. Then she sighed, like she had been hoping that topic would never come up again. What she told me next is something I'll never forget. She said that after I talked to Mrs. Harrison that day, Mrs. Harrison called her, and she didn't sound calm. Apparently, the house we had been looking into used to belong to another family years before the Harrisons moved in. That family had a daughter. Her name was Lily. She was 11 years old, and one afternoon, just after school, she was hit by a car right in front of the house. She died before the ambulance even arrived. According to my mom, it happened decades ago, but there was one detail that stuck with Mrs. Harrison enough that she mentioned it specifically. Lily had been wearing a yellow sweater that day. After the accident, the family moved away not long after. The Harrisons bought the house sometime later. My mom didn't go into much detail about what happened after that. She just said that the Harrisons had trouble using that third-floor room, that strange things would happen, enough that they eventually decided to keep it closed off, completely. I remember sitting there, trying to process what she was telling me, trying to connect it with what I'd seen, what I had experienced. And then one thought hit me harder than anything else: the timing. Every day she appeared around 3:30, right after school, the same time she would have come home, the same time she died. I asked my mom why they never told me any of this back then. She said they didn't want to scare me, that they thought it was better to just remove the problem instead of explaining it. So they closed the curtains, moved my bed, and told me to stay away from the window. I'm older now. I understand why they did what they did, but that doesn't make it any less unsettling, because I know what I saw. I know she was there, day after day, smiling, waving, playing those little silent games with me, until the night she wasn't smiling anymore, until she started asking for help. I don't know what she wanted, and I don't think I want to know. All I know is that I've never liked windows since then, especially ones that let you see too clearly into someone else's space, or worse, something else looking back at you.